Okay, so thank you all for joining for our third and final class in this current series on the teachings of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. For tonight, we're going to explore mostly Torah number 12, Torah Yud Bet in Likutei Moharan Tinyana. And I'll be basing it off of teachings that from my teacher, Rabbi Don Hauser. And we're going to explore the idea of simplicity in service of God. It'll be, when I say the word simplicity, what comes to mind? Simplicity and service of God. What associations do you have? What does it mean to you? Anyone?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I just got
Yes.
this for a minute.
You can hear me. All right, great. So I'll try it again. When I say the word simplicity and service of God, right? Avodat Hashem and what Rabbi Nachman calls shitut or tmimut, simplicity. What comes to mind for you? Have you ever considered that as part of your Avodat Hashem, as part of your relationship with God? What might it mean? We're going to see what Rabbi Nachman says. It gets a little complex, and that's why I wanted to put something which is interesting, right? The simplicity becomes complex. We'll leave that as it is, and we'll try to make sense of it. But what would it mean to serve God with simplicity? Yeah, in like one sentence. Yeah, Barry.
Yeah, I think the task is clear. We came out of Egypt with the covenant between God and us to be His Eved and take His Torah, and that task is clear. It's pretty simple. That He's the boss. We're the people who serve Him, and we just have to learn Torah and execute. So the task is clear. The execution is the hard part.
Okay, interesting. So you see simplicity as simply following God's will, becoming kind of subservient, saying God's will is my will. That's what I will do.
If I can discern it and know how to execute it, yeah. Even Moshe had trouble.
Sure.
Doing that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So,
yeah, Tim.
So, and I think this is similar to what Barry's saying, but to me, it's someone who doesn't spend a lot of time. Not that they're not thinking about their religious tasks, but they're sort of like they have kind of the faith that they know what they're supposed to do and they do it. And there's not a lot of sort of struggling and wrestling with concepts that may be confusing or may be troubling, but it's more, you just, this is what I believe I should do, and this is what I'm going to do. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I think.
Sure, you're saying it's like without intellectual analysis, kind of like I have a tradition, I know what I'm supposed to do, and I do it. I don't question. Okay, so like kind of like a faith, like a simple faith. Okay, interesting. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Nachman's going to open with, something very akin to that. But what I see in this Torah and what's striking to me about this Torah is it's not a negative connotation. Simplicity here is not saying I'm going to accept it and I don't analyze. I'm not studying any further and I just kind of know what I know and that's enough. Simplicity here means following your instincts in the service of God on a certain level. And Rabbi Nachman's going to talk about, he's going to contrast between getting too analytical and rationalizing things and following your heart in the way that we might talk about following your heart, right? Following your intuition in service of God. So let's jump in and we're going to explore that together. These are excerpts. It's not the entire Torah. And there's a lot to unpack. Again, we'll do our best. We'll do our best and you can follow up with anything. Okay, so here's what Rabbi Nachman writes. When a person follows their own intellect and cleverness, they can fall into many mistakes and pitfalls, right? Okay, interesting, like funny usage of Hebrew, but there wasn't modern Hebrew, right? But yeah, you can fall in kind of mistakes and there are many pitfalls and come to great evil. ולבוא לידי רעות גדולות, חס ושלום, God forbid. ויש שקלקלו הרבה, כגון הרשעים הגדולים המאוד מאוד מפורסמים. And there are many who have caused tremendous damage, like famous outstanding villains who have led the world astray. All on account, right? שיטוט העולם והכל היה על ידי חוכמתם ושכלם, getting over analytical, trying to follow your own cleverness and intellect in the service of God. And that has caused evil in the world. Hold on, Tim. We're gonna unpack. We're gonna unpack. And again, like the unpacking, hopefully we'll unpack some, but I'm not promising, right? Okay, so here we are. So in general, okay, so I'll read another piece and then we'll get to the unpacking and then we'll get some comments. Okay, Vikar Yahadut, says Rabbi Nachman, so he's contrasting intellect, analysis, rationale with Ikar Yahadut. The essence of Judaism is to conduct yourself solely with innocence and simplicity. B'tmimut u'b'pshitut. I once said this word to like Israelis, and they're like, pshitut's not a word. Simplicity would be like pashtut davar, but this is a Rabbi Nachman concept that's like stuck with me. Pshitut, getting simple with your faith, getting simple with God. Bli shum chochmot, without any sophistication. With that, and it's not in a way of saying it's not sophisticated. It's not, again, it's not negative. It's saying getting simple, not allowing anything to be a barrier in between you and God and your avodat Hashem. And a person has to look at everything that you do, to ascertain that God is present in whatever you do. Without attending to your own personal kavod, to your own personal respect, dignity, perhaps. But if it accords dignity to God, if it helps God be magnified in God's respect in the world, that's what you should do. Love. And if it doesn't, if it takes away from God's kavod in the world, don't do it. And if you follow that method, right, you won't fall into any pitfalls. Okay, so Rabbi Nachman is trying to lay out a map for our relationship to God in the world. And in general, when people cite Torah number 12 in Likutei Moran Tinyana, it's in order to describe a believer's struggles in moments of doubt when you've lost your faith. We're going to get to that piece a little bit. But it's the Torah of Aye, right? Aye is the question of where is God? Aye mekom kvodo. It describes in the teachings of Rabbi Nachman this place of real deep questioning of I can't see God here. Aye mekom kvodo is not like show me God's glory. It's where is God? Right? That's the reread. So that's in the depths of kind of doubt. And Rabbi Nachman talks about the believer's ability to turn heretical questioning into an act of faith itself, right? That when you ask Aye mekom kvodo, and you're able to ask this, you're renewing your connection with God from that place of doubt, right? You see an absence of God, you feel an absence of God, but you're still able to say, okay, I'm still searching. Aye mekom kvodo. I want to renew this connection. I'm able to ask, can you help me find it again, right? And there's a renewed connection with a hidden God, right? God that's not apparent to the believer. And when you're trying to connect to, this is what my teacher says, right? When you're trying to connect to God through this place of the hidden, right? It's a place that's fundamental to creation. It's something that Rabbi Nachman is going to call further on in this Torah, Hama'amar Hasatum, the closed utterance, the place that, right, we don't, a statement of God that we don't understand, right? The creation of God, places that, right, God created the world through utterances. It's creation that we don't understand. That's how we try to create that connection from that place of doubt, from absence. But beyond that, Rabbi Nachman is mapping out in this Torah how to behave in the world, how to kind of bring your heart to move towards God, to move towards greater faith. And Rabbi Nachman's mapping out this relational dynamic between us and God. So when Rabbi Nachman starts by saying that the root of creation is kavod, is dignity or respect, but the dignity of God. And this characterization of kavod, okay, we're gonna see more of this. and it's actually connected to this week's parsha. Let's see if we have kavod further on here. Okay, now we're gonna get to this in a second. So the idea of kavod speaks of a relationship between the external and the internal, between the revealed and the hidden in our lives. So there's the revealed experience, what we see, what we know, and then there's the hidden. In the Talmud Masechet Shabbat Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph 113a, Rabbi Yochanan actually calls his clothing mechabdai, right? My dignifiers, right? And we talk about clothing as the thing that covers our pnimiut, the stuff that's inside of us. Our clothing covers our bodies, and in doing so protects us physically, but also emotionally, right? It protects us physically, but also protects us from embarrassment, protects us from being too revealed to the world, and protects us from being perhaps objectified in the eyes of others simply as a body, and it allows us to maintain our internal life and our privacy. And through clothing's concealment of our bodies, other things are revealed. And of course, clothing's going to be a metaphor. We're going to see a little more, right? So we have this connection between kavod, covering, right? Covering what's concealed in the world is covered, and what's revealed through concealment. Okay, so what's revealed through what is concealed? How might it be that clothing or something that hides the pnimiut, our internal worlds, or the internal life in the world, actually reveals something? I don't know, how does, and this relates to this week's parsha. Like I said, we talk about the clothing of the Kohanim. How does our external appearance, or the way that we clothe ourselves, the way that we might clothe the world around us by concealing things, how does that also reveal something about us? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Well, I would think that if we say that the clothing sort of acts as an interface between what someone's body looks like, someone's physicality, and the impression of their physicality that the rest of the world gets. And we have an expression about the modesty of a Jewish woman, many times saying "Kvod bas melech pnima,"
or the modesty of anyone, right? We can broaden that, right? The modesty of anyone through wearing of clothes, which is also a chovan, also a requirement for men, for Jewish men. So
right,
yeah, right. You're saying that it reveals something about your. Say more about that, right? It reveals something about your pnimiut, what's pnima, what's inside. Right, and we talk about this in the context of this week's parsha. We talk about how the clothing of the Kohanim, right, befits their role, right? It reveals something about what they're meant to be doing, and perhaps, right, there are different commentators who understand the role of wearing a uniform at a job, right? For the Kohanim, wearing a certain type of clothing that is reflective of kingship, of high levels of dignity, of royalty. Right, it reflects that they're serving in a very dignified role. It reflects that they're reflects their dignity as servants of God and as appointees to be servants of God in the holiest place, or it reflects their service to God. Right, it reflects that God is befitting of that dignity, that royalty. Or a third option, right, is that it also what we wear, or what the Kohanim wear, the way that we hide things in the terms of this Torah, right, the way that we cover over our pnimiut, also reminds us of our role in the world, right? It's saying, like, we can't let, and then Rabbi Nachman is going to touch on this further, we can't kind of allow what's internal to us to be revealed too easily, too willy-nilly, right? We have to be careful of how we interpret what's going on in our internal life into the world, how we expose what's going on in our internal life into the world, and even our internal spiritual life. Rabbi Nachman is going to speak further about, we don't want it to get kind of muddied by the externalities of the world. We want to make sure that there is a hatama. Can anyone translate the word hatama for me? There's like a matching, right, that needs to happen between the way that we present ourselves externally and the way that and the level that we're on internally in order for things to kind of flow. So the way that we dress could remind us.
I would think that saying Hatama kind of means an alignment.
Yes, an alignment. That's a good word, right? There needs to be an alignment between the way that we present ourselves to what we project to the outside and what's going on the inside. That could be a third reading of the clothing idea, especially with the Kohanim, of Kohanim who need to be constantly on in the Beit HaMikdash or in the Mishkan in this week's Parsha, right? That the clothing they wear reminds them, oh, this is right. I need intentionality here, right? What I'm doing requires a lot because look at these ornate royal clothes that I'm wearing, right? I'm reminded to keep my head up, right? To keep my intentions sharp as I perform this service. So similarly, it could be that, right, what's covered kind of speaks to what's inside or the potential of what's inside, what I'm doing, what my role is in the world. Okay.
Rabbanit, are we just talking about clothing aspect at this point?
Yes, we're talking about kavod, right? So we're talking about the kavod and perhaps the kavod of God, and how the root of creation, according to Rabbi Nachman, is dignity. The dignity that we display is reflective of our relationship with God, and we're supposed to act in accordance with what befits the dignity of God, right? And that's the question we need to ask ourselves, right? Is what I'm doing not only befitting my dignity and my short-term goals of how I want to be seen in the world, right? It shouldn't be only that; it should be a longer view, right? We should take a longer view of how are my actions in the world befitting the kavod of God, and that's how I should align my actions in the world.
I have a question.
Does this befit the glory of God in the world?
I have a question for you when you want to take it. The question is regarding the broader aspect of kavod and how that concept of simplicity or reflection of who we are compares with Yaakov Avinu's demeanor and actions with Lavan in Padan Aram, and how how that shakes out with simplicity and kavod.
Okay, I think it's a good question.
Anytime you want to, it doesn't have to be
project this back onto other stories, but I think that's a little too far afield right now. We can address that in another time for sure. Right, I think it's an interesting thought experiment.
Let it sit on the table. Go about
right, because we're going to stay within our own internal lives, right? Rabbi Nachman speaking to us in our emotional lives, our internal lives, and saying, how can this concept of simplicity shape our lives as Ovdei Hashem, as servants of God, right? So that's what we're focused on right now.
I'm good.
Okay, so says Rabbi Nachman, we're going to continue.
Can I ask a quick historical context question?
Go for it.
So, especially in the first section that you read, I'm wondering if any of this is sort of in response, on the one hand, to the Misnagadim who kind of value Torah study and intellect, in some ways, at least from the Hasidic point of view, to the exclusion of sort of the inner spiritual life, because it's all about studying Torah and the intellect, as opposed to the feeling of, in your kishkas of the spirituality. And then on the other hand, perhaps of the Haskalah of, and that particularly some of the stuff about kavod and clothing, it seems like that might be something that the Haskalah would have a very different view of. So I'm just wondering.
Yes. So I think you're right. I think in his context, Rabbi Nachman is being very countercultural. He's saying, don't go according to all of this rational thought, right? That's not the main aspect of service of God. Rather, you should bring it back to your internal life and your own intuition and your relationship with God, and not export it to externalities and things that you think are like that reason is dictating your service of God. No, that's like the place of reason might have other places in the world right now, but it shouldn't be imported into your religious life in the same way. I think it is, I don't have the authority on this, but I think it is in response to his context for sure, which is interesting why he's pushing for this. I think, I don't know, it's a lot easier now to say like, okay, but reason has its limits, but in his context, it was like this revolution, right? Of saying we can control things, we can figure things out, that this is a new way of living in life that's going to give us certainty. And Rabbi Nachman saying, no, it's not going to give you all the certainty you need. and don't forget to cultivate an internal life that is befitting our external life, right? That there's going to be all this externality, and like if you export, or if you outsource all of your trust in God to there, it's going to fall flat. It's going to lack an internal vitality that Rabbi Nachman was talking about. So I don't know if it fit for his time. It seems countercultural. For now, for our times, it works a lot better. So he had to wait. No, I'm kidding. I don't think he had to actually wait, but I think you're right. Okay. So Rabbi Nachman continues. So let me, I'll read a bit inside of the Torah and then go outside to the analysis of my teacher, and we'll see where the paths meet. Okay. and then we'll have more time for processing at the end. Okay. So it says, continues Rabbi Nachman, even at times when you fall into these areas of doubt, right? We said that's the place where you feel an absence of God, right? And there are times when this descent can be extremely great. May the merciful one spare us, right? God should save us from that. And one falls into doubts and heretical thoughts and even questions God. And right, we doubt that God exists. Even so, you should know that the downfall and the descent is for the sake of the ascent that follows it, right? So that's how you hold on to faith in those moments, is that when you're falling, you should know, okay, right, the farther I fall, right, this falling is in order for me to find my way back. It's not a final descent that I can't recover from. In the Talmud, when there's a sugya that talks about, right, taking on certain elements of risk, who's responsible if you're climbing a ladder, right, and if you're on a ladder and you're hammering something, right, or you're on a ladder and then you fall, right, you're climbing upward, you're in an upward motion, but then you fall down and you injure someone. Or if your hammer is on the upward swing, right, and it happens to, like, the top falls off and it hits someone. So it's like, that's kind of they'll describe that in the Talmud. He takes, I don't know if he's taking his language from there, but they talk about it as a aliyah l'tzorach yerida, or yerida l'tzorach aliyah. Are you putting down the hammer or the axe in order to then lift it up, right? So, or are you lifting it up in order to put it down? And in which things are there inherent forces that you should be aware of, right? So here Rabbi Nachman saying, well, this yerida, this descent, is in order to gain energy for the ascent that will follow, right? That's kind of saying, right, in which direction is the energy going? It says when you're descending, you should know that you're really going down in order to be able to then go up. So, right, this moment of doubt will only strengthen your faith if you're able to hold on to that knowledge as you're descending into it. Kida, kishorish kol habriya kavod, right? So we have this Rabbi Nachman thing, right? This key word of da, you should know, right? This internal knowing, and that's what speaks in this Torah as well, right? Saying, like, you know inside of you, right? You should know that creation is about kavod. Everything that God created was only for God's glory, for God's dignity. Right? So it says, right, anything that's called in my name, I've created for my kavod. And because everything was created for God's glory, okay, and that means that things are created for God's glory. That means that at the essence of everything, the root of creation is God's glory and creating kavod for God. Right? So even though, and I here is where I skipped over a section. So it's not going to follow entirely, but you'll see. Even though creation, even though it is all one, creation is one, there are parts of creation. Barry asked a good question. It's not possible that some fall descent could be a result from overanalysis or maybe misunderstanding of other sources. Yes, right. I think Rabbi Nachman would say yes, right. Part of the reason for your descent into doubt is overanalysis, is not trusting, is not being attuned to your internal wisdom. again, as like as someone who loves Talmud, I'm not discouraging analysis and intellectual analysis, but there's like a balance here that I think is really healthy that you could take from this teaching. That's what I personally take from it, is not to rely more on one or the other, but to integrate the two, to say, right, I can ask questions, but at times when I'm feeling doubt and I don't have answers, there is place for faith, for knowing that there's a truth here, that there's God's presence here, right? Always asking, where is God's presence in this current moment, in this action, in this event, and trying to find it. So I think there's like again, an integration and a balance. Okay, so even though it's all one, creation is nevertheless compromised of parts, and in each individual part, and every part of creation has its own unique aspect of the glory of God, which is the essence and the root of creation as a whole. So in everything, there will be a piece of kavod. And that's the meaning of that God created the world in 10 utterances. So God could have created the world in one utterance. But however, it was created in 10 utterances for the sake of reward and punishment. And each and each utterance contains its own unique aspect of glory, which is its root, for glory is the root of all things. There's something to be found in each part of the creation that we need to uncover. And again, there's that balance between uncovering it, its internal life of its kavod, and maintaining its dignity and expressing it in a way that's befitting of its internal truth. And we need to figure that out. We need to find that. And there's room in there for messing up, because since God created it in 10 different utterances, things are piecemeal, things are not immediately apparent, things are hidden. But there's potential there for us to uncover it, to uncover the glory of God. And it's okay. There's sachar va'onesh, right? That's like built into the system, right? That there will be stumbling blocks that we will find, and we will fall, and then we will ascend again once we are able to align once again with the kavod that is inherent in everything. That's the shoresh habriya. And this is the meaning of, and in a sanctuary, everything declares glory. Enclosed in each utterance is God's glory, through which the world was created, for the whole world is filled with his glory, because it says, right, right, in every utterance, there's the hidden, the clothing, and then the internal life, which is the kavod. Even in transgressions and evil things, God forbid, where God's glory is not present, because glory has a limit. I will not give my glory to another. The glory doesn't go into the places of sin or places of evil things, he describes, right? Okay. Even though the whole world is filled with God's glory, there's nevertheless, okay, right? There's still a limit on this. So somehow, even as God's glory fills all of creation, there's still a limit to where God's glory will go. Okay, that's paradoxical, right? To say like God's glory fills the entire existence of the world, and yet there are places where you won't find God's glory because it's not befitting to God's glory, right? There's kivyachol, there are these spaces that God's glory doesn't exist, right? That God won't appear, that God won't emanate from there. Okay, sure, right? That there's, right, yeah, Barry's mentioning, right, that there's God's command to Avraham Avinu to perform the Akedah, right? There are moments where we can't see what God's intention is, right? Where we're going to be consumed by doubt, and that is kind of by design, right? There somehow, right? That we have to know that God's glory is everywhere and yet not here. And in those moments where we feel God's absence, right? God wasn't supposed to be there, right? That's we're going to feel it. Okay. ויש גבול לכל כבוד וכבוד שמלובש בכל מאמר מעשרה מאמרות שלא ייפשט במקומות החיצוניים. And there is thus each aspect of glory enclosed in each of the 10 utterances has a limit that keeps it from spreading to outside places that are bad, places of transgression, places that are not connected to God's glory, right? So the limit. Avalda, but no. Despite this, right? You would experience those places as empty of God's glory, but that's not true entirely. It still is filled of, it's still animated by life force from God. But he's trying to address this paradox of saying, right, God fills the entire world, and yet in places that are counter to God's glory, God does not exist. But even so, right, in order to exist, they need to receive vitality from God. And therefore, when a person falls, when a person falls into these stumbling blocks and finds themselves in a place of transgressing or of having thoughts of doubting God's existence, places of doubt, which is in the same vein of these kind of filthy places, falling into doubts and heresy, then you kind of look at yourself and you see how distant you are from God's glory. And after, when you begin examining yourself and you see that distance, as a consequence, you ask and you say, God spare us. You ask and you seek, where is God's glory? This is the essence. This is the essence of rectification and ascent. This is the descent for the sake of ascent that follows, that ability to see the distance and begin to ask, where has God gone? I'm in this place of absence, and where is God? For Aye, this place of Aye, where is God, right? Feeling the absence of God, alludes to the supreme glory of the highest utterance, the hidden utterance of Breshit, from where the life force for these places is drawn, right? The places that feel like God doesn't exist in them, they still draw essence from God, but they're drawing essence from a place that is hidden, right? That's the Ma'amar HaSatum in Breshit, the utterance that we can't understand, that is opaque, that we can't break through. That's the source of all the things that look evil in the world, that feel like God isn't there. And so when a person says, when you say that, when you're able to utter the question, where is God? With that very question, you return and ascend to the supreme glory, the concept of Aye, which by virtue of its great concealment and hiddenness gives life to those places. Thus now, by having fallen into the place of doubt, right, and consequently sought and been able, right, once you fall into that place, you're able to see the distance, and then you ask Aye Mekom Kvodo. Through that question, you reconnect yourself to the Ma'amar Satum, to that hidden place, or to God. And so instills vitality into your own downfall, and you're able to rise up to the highest heights. V'zeu bechinot olah. And this is connected, right? And there's lots more in the continuation, but I wanted to bring this final piece. This is the concept of the olah, the burnt offering, and this is what Barry talked about before. He connects it to the place of the Akedah, that place of extreme doubt, right? Where Abraham said, right, where Abraham had this test of faith that brought him to the places of saying, child sacrifice, right? That's the so counter to the God that I know, so counter to the faith that I've been drawn into, and this relationship that I have with God. How could God be possibly in this place where God is, right? This is what Yitzchak says. I understand that you want to bring me to sacrifice to God, but where where's the seh? Where's the sacrifice? And that's the ayah of, if you mean to sacrifice me, then where is God here? Right? Here. So Rabbi Nachman takes that story and kind of flips it around, and he says, asking ayeh here is the concept of the lamb for the olah, to rectify and atone for those thoughts in the heart that stem from the filthy places. And this is, I don't think it's a critique of Abraham, but he's kind of talking about that place of doubt that Abraham might have inhabited, or probably did inhabit, when God asked him to sacrifice his son Yitzchak. Right? That ayeh, asking, Yitzchak being able to ask, okay, but where is God? Where's the seh? Right? It can't be that this is God that wants me to be sacrificed. That concept itself is the lamb for the olah, right? That's asking ayeh is equivalent to, in that story, the finding of the ram that was ne'achaz basfach, that was there in order to be lifted up, right? That is the question that rectifies and atones for the thoughts, the doubt that stem from the filthy places, from the places where you don't feel God. For it's through the concept of ayeh that a person is rectified, and is oleh, ascends from there, as mentioned above. And that is tshuva, zeh bechino tshuva, zeh ikar tshuva. That's the concept, the essence of repentance, when a person seeks and searches for the glory of God and sees for himself that he's far from God's glory, yearns for it, and asks in frustration, ayeh mekom kvodo. This in itself is his repentance and rectification, as mentioned above. V'haven hetev, and understand this well. That is the movement of tshuva, of being able to say, I find myself really distant from God. Ayeh mekom kvodo. Okay. Should I take reactions now, or should we go to the analysis and then take reactions? Are people sitting with a lot of questions after hearing this idea? Okay. Well, Dina, did you want to jump in? Okay.
What
right,
I
so-
would say, say here is actually that if you are familiar with the works of Rabbi Nachman and his followers and his Hasidim and so on, they're very much associated with people wearing a kippah, which takes the word Nachman and writes it one letter, two letters, three letters. It breaks it up. So it's Nachman, it spells it out a little piece at a time. And I think that tells you a little something about the approach to Torah learning and the approach to the philosophy of Judaism that's with Nachman. And also what we mentioned here before, we're talking about this week's Parsha, which is the Big Day Kohen. And you have to realize that in those years, the main thing that you looked at was the garment that someone was wearing. And I know very little about what undergarments were in those years, but I suspect that they didn't have much in the way of undergarments. And that's one of the reasons that when we talk about the Beit HaMikdash, that one of many of the songs that the Levium sang in the Beit HaMikdash started out with Shir HaMa'alot, which was the song while the Kohen was ascending the steps leading up to the altar. And the Kohen, and the altar was built with steps and with rather small steps, so that the Kohen's private parts would not be exposed on this. And it became what I said before, and I don't know if it was too well received, about the idea of Kvod Bat Melech Nima, but there's certain that are private in Judaism, and we shouldn't let the private things take on so much meaning to an onlooker that they take away attention from the main points that are being made and from the main points of the learning. And so, same thing with the Kohen. They shouldn't be looking at him and saying, "Oh, look at that! Oh, there's this, what?" And that's not the idea. The idea is you should see, when you look at the Kohen, the image that you should see is an image of someone wearing very special garments, of someone wearing a plate on his head that says Kadosh Hashem, and so on, and that fits with that, and the Ma'alot fits with the concept of Nachman of having nun chet mem, and all the going in the steps, and
Okay.
it all fits with that, because this is very much part of the
Okay.
service of the temple, and this is very much important that the things that are done stepwise.
Okay. We're not talking about the coins closed right now, so I wanted to move away from that and to go back to the Torah.
Apologize.
It's okay. You're fine. You're fine. I just wanted to make sure we unpacked the Rabbi Nachman sources first. Okay. So
Good.
Okay. So Rabbi Nachman explains all of this by going into the root of creation, which he calls kavod. Let me see that I'm on the right page here. Okay, I want to start from the beginning. Okay, so we find the fundamental. Okay, this here. Okay. Moving one step backwards. At the beginning of the Torah, Rabbi Nachman contrasts following one's intellect or reasoning with following one's simplicity or tmimut or pshitut, right? We said like getting simple. And Rabbi Nachman's argument is that one who follows their intellect and reasoning is liable to stumble over the stumbling blocks that creates and end up with bad results, end up in a bad place. And this is a surprising contention, like we mentioned, against the great faith that we place, or even in Rabbi Nachman's time, in reason and rationality. And Rabbi Nachman is speaking about a different approach to life, right? Not to follow only facts and the scientific method, right? He's talking about a Jewish way of living, which is one of simplicity and kind of a naivete, an acceptance of the way things are, and seeing things through your intuition. And instead of trusting reason, which would seem to be more universally valued as a way of evaluating the world, Rabbi Nachman argues that the thing we can most trust is not in the mind, but in the heart of any Jew, something that's internal to us. And the characteristic of simplicity is something a lot more basic, a lot more primal, right? And most of us develop a more complex sensibilities as we mature, leaving simplicity as something that's associated with children, or like I said, tmimut is it's translated as a naivete in modern Hebrew. But Rabbi Nachman is kind of reclaiming this idea of simplicity and saying it's not only for children, right? It's not something that we evolve past and leave behind. Right? It's not something immature. He says that we need to actually cultivate our simplicity in our service of God. And you're not assured spiritual success right away, right? He talks about the descents in the process. There'll be ups and downs, but the descents will lead to other spiritual ascents. So we have to explain, why does Judaism lead us to follow our simplicity, something that would seem to be blind from complex reality and would seem to be something we associate with children who haven't really evolved past it? So why wouldn't Judaism want to protect us from mistakes and from those stumbling blocks that Rabbi Nachman acknowledges will happen if we take this kind of approach, following our simplicity in service of God? And furthermore, what draws Rabbi Nachman to see simplicity as so fundamental to Judaism? Why is he so suspicious of rationality and knowledge in the world, when on the surface it would be a much more cautious and reasonable way of approaching decisions in life and also our service of God? And Rabbi Nachman explains all of this by saying again, right, that simplicity, that kavod is at the root of creation. And this characterization of reality as kavod, right, as needing to bespeak of God's kavod, dignity, or respect. So it speaks about our relationship the relationship in the world between the external and the internal, between the revealed and the hidden in our lived experience. We talked about how Rabbi Yochanan calls his clothing dignifiers, the things that cover our internal life, perhaps, right? If we're speaking about it as a metaphor. So they protect us from being objectified, and they maintain our privacy. But their concealment through the concealment of clothing, and we saw this use of this like levush, right, malbush, things that clothe the world. Through concealment, other things are revealed. So to some extent, right, the way we conceal our bodies also reveals something about how we understand ourselves, right? What do we choose to wear? What message are we trying to project into the world? And all of this reveals kind of our pnimiyut, right? Our internal essence. How do I see myself? What do I want others to see when they look at me? And so kind of in that act of concealing, we reveal something that others might not have known about us, right? What is our internal life like, such that we chose to conceal ourselves in this way? And so too in the world, right? That there's concealment that reveals the inner essence of the thing, of creation, of the different elements of creation. But then dignity is somewhat elusive, therefore, right? That it conceals the revealed on the one hand and reveals what's concealed on the other. Practically, this expresses an elusive relationship between understanding the internal and the external. There's a quote, right, that in Pirkei Avot, that one who runs after kavod, one who runs chases after gaining dignity and respect, right, kavod runs away from them, and vice versa. And if many would be tempted to design their external appearance in accordance with the expectations of the world around them, right? If I dress this way, right, people will automatically be drawn after me and see me as respectable, and they'll know that I'm this, and therefore they'll come and follow my, my lead. But they would quickly realize, and we quickly realize, that if someone's internal life doesn't actually match the way they present themselves to the world externally, people can sense that, right? People can sense that the vitality, right, the inner essence, the chiyut that they're trying to express to the world through their external appearance doesn't match what's actually animating them. And they wouldn't be able to conceal that, right? That there's emptiness, right? People can sense that. Only one who knows how to cultivate a rich internal life can project to others an external appearance which will exude that vitality, that connectedness to God, which will draw others near to them and to their teachings. And only matching external internal life, that's what Rabbi Nachman seems to be teaching, will really exude that vitality and bring others to you. I don't know if that's like he's not particularly saying, right, this is someone trying to create a following, but he's saying, like, people can sense, right, when something isn't genuine. People can sense when there's a mismatch. Barry disagrees. Okay, so we'll bring that up. But further, that is to say that only when it's clear from the outside that what's internal to you, right, won't be harmed or diluted or become muddied when you express it to the world, will the external respond with signs of vitality. So what he's saying is, right, if what's inside is true and real and ready to be revealed to the world, okay, sorry, I'm just reacting to some comments coming in. Okay, so if what's true on the inside is ready to be expressed, right, and you figure out a way to express what's your internal life to the world in a way that's real, then the external that you try to project will reflect that, right? People will be able to see that. When our external appearance, when we project into the world is aligned with our internal life, it'll be apparent to people that that's true. And when it's not, people can sense it. And one could argue that, according to Rabbi Nachman, right, it would seem to be like this is the entire claim of faith, right? That the external appearances of the world, right? He said that the world is created and is composed of 10 ma'amarot, right? That we have to kind of mine the glory from them. External appearances hide a rich internal life behind them, right? And if we approach the creation as kavod, that means that beyond the creation, if we look further and we try to find God there, there's going to be God's light there if we can mine it appropriately and if we can access it. So protecting the kavod of creation would mean, or like other living beings that we interact with, means not getting caught up with how they seem on the surface, but being able and prepared to see beyond their externalities. My teacher quotes, right, how the Tehillim, the Perek Tehillim, that says, "Hashemayim mesaprim kavod el," right? The skies speak of the glory of God, right? And skies, right? The sky, the universe, speaks to the expanses of both things that we can't access, right? There's so much out there that we can't access. And there's also places where we can't find God or where we don't see God apparently and readily. this creation itself can speak to our inability to see God in a clear way, because everything is so large, and there's perhaps in some places there's a felt absence of God, kivyachol, and there's a hiddenness, and all this brings a person to look further and look beyond, and not get caught up with what will bring them kavod in the short term. That God stretches out the heavens like a tent, right? Notesh shamayim kiriyah. The skies are like clothing in the world, or right, the external appearances of the world are like clothing, which asks the viewer to look at the outside and understand that there's an internal truth there that needs to be protected and dignified, an internal truth that we may not be able to access all the time. So Rabbi Nachman in our Torah says he seeks vitality, right, an internal life force of the world. Where there's kavod Hashem, there's vitality, right? Where there's the glory of God, you'll be able to sense it because there's a life force, there's an energy. And that is to say that a believer is able to take that stance, right? That's us, right? We're able to like take a step backwards and to respect, to dignify the fact that there are things that are hidden. There's the hiddenness of God in the world that we can't always readily see. And when we're able to take that step backwards, there's an opening for a more intimate relationship with God. That in our taking a step backwards, right, there's that distance that's created from the external, from the way that things appear, from the absence of God that might be something that we feel and see in that moment. And we take a step backwards and we say, there might be something deeper here. And in the externalities, right, you step back from the external, and then perhaps that opens up a space to get closer to what's the internal life of the thing, or the godliness, the divine light that's in creation. So that's that's like the paradox that we said before, right? Someone who runs after kavod, kavod runs from him. And this is also like the Eitz Hadat in the story of creation. All of that was, right, the Eitz Hadat, Tovara, we had to actually stay away from it. And if we stayed away from trying to understand, from trying to get that dot, that's when we would stay closer to the Eitz HaChaim. We'd stay alive, right? It would keep us alive, and we'd get that chiyut, that vitality, and the temptation to go towards the Eitz Hadat, to try and gain understanding of everything and control the world around us. Is kind of like, right, someone running after kavod, saying, I'm going to control everything on the outside. I'm going to figure out how I'm going to control how my life plays out. And I'm going to try and find certainty in the world, in externalities, right? And to trust in that, to say, like, I've attained it, right? I know what's going on in the world. I know how to succeed in the world, and that's what I'm going to trust in. And Rabbi Nachman says, no, that's not how you'll find certainty. Rabbi Nachman teaches that Torah ba'atzma zeh b'chinat Eitz Hadat. Torah itself is like the essence of the tree. Eitz HaChaim is the tree of life, the opposite of the Eitz Hadat, of trying to control, of trying to understand. It's the Eitz HaChaim. It itself is the ways that we're supposed to act in the world, and it guides us in a way that will not muddy, that will not destroy the internal life of our own internal life and anyone else around us. That's the point that we draw upon, and the thing that we rely upon would be our own pnimiut, our own internal essence, right? Our own instincts, our intuition. And you walk around the world kind of looking, right? You're looking for God, looking for God's glory, trying to access things, but not knowing, right? Our approach to the world is to be seeking things, right? Seeking God, but not knowing how to control the world, or where we're going to find kavod. And we're looking around knowing that in that stance of saying, I don't know everything, and I'm looking and I'm open, right? I'm going to stumble, right? I'm going to have those nifilot, those moments of where I'm not connected to God, where I encounter absence. Right, there's always going to be those external factors that maybe I won't be able to see. Okay, that's the glory of God in this moment. That's the glory of God in this creation. That's the glory of God in the person standing in front of me. But the pnimiyut, the internal life of our own internal life, the pnimiyut of those around us, relies on our own internal senses and our intuition, that we can sense how to identify what's going on beyond the surface. Right, the surface is the egel, the surface is the idolatry, and Rabbi Nachman's encouraging us to rely on our own intuition, to know when things are real, when they're genuine, when they're right in the service of God or not. Right, the pnimiyut can also go to bad places, right? We can say when we try to access the darker places, when there is emptiness. When there's simplicity, when you approach it with simplicity, you'll know also to say to God, Aye, right? To cry out and to say, I want to believe that God is in this place, right? That's the approach of pshitut, right? Of walking around seeking, but also knowing when I encounter absence, I can ask and I can cry out, and I just stand in front of God, knowing I don't have all the answers, but I know that you can lead me back. I know that this descent and this feeling of absence won't be forever. I know that I can find God if I keep following that intuition, if I keep trying to get connected, if I keep asking, right? The very act of asking, that aye, is like a fundamental act of faith that can always lead us back to God and renew our relationship with God. That is the approach of simplicity in Rabbi Nachman, and guiding our lives and our faith through an approach of simplicity. I'll invite folks to ask questions, make comments. I'm curious if people have, right, there are many critiques that come up in my mind as I learn this Torah. And I know personally that I found it very useful in my spiritual life, of approaching God with simplicity, of trying to be reconnected with my own intuitions in service of God, and connecting to God through my own sensibilities. So I invite all of your reactions. We can pause the recording so people can feel free to share. And so that's what I'll do right now.